Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is June 9th, 2022. That's a Thursday. Joining me for today's podcast is tech journalism's dynamic trio. Stewart Wolpin, who scribes for Popular Mechanics, U.S. News, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other fine publications. John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. And Rob Pegoraro, who writes frequently on tech policy for Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and USA Today. Gentlemen, how are you? And Rob, especially to you, how you're feeling better, I hope. You had a little bit of bout with our friendly COVID. No, it's not friendly. But COVID.
Yes, I managed to join the rather uncoveted club of people to get COVID, although really it's not that exclusive. Started feeling a bit of a sore throat last Thursday, definitely Friday of last week. Had one negative test before going home from this conference overseas, tested negative again Friday night, tested positive Sunday night. So PSA, you can't just take one negative test and think you're done. Apparently, if you're vaccinated and you feel like a sore throat or a stuffy nose, that could be a cold or allergies, could be your immune system getting to work, and it will take a little while before enough virus builds up for a rapid test to turn positive. Good news is I feel much better. The little positive strip in the test I took today was lighter than the control strip, which is a good thing to see. So I think you all are not rid of me yet. Sorry.
and you get apparently a European strain of COVID. I don't know whether that's good or worse if you caught it in Helsinki where you were. I guess when
it's a little more exclusive.
Well, we all, of course, wish you the best of health, and as we wish everybody the best of health as they work through all this. Got a lot to talk about. I thought we were going to have just a few topics, just given the WWDC recap that I want to dive into. But we've had some breaking news. Let me bring that up here. Just within the last 24 hours, late breaking news. Netflix apparently is going to acquire, or at least they're in talks to acquire Roku. It's been acquire Roku, not the other way around. My experience is when information like this comes out, it's always like a planned leak type of thing. Despite the fact that probably that is not something that the SEC wants to see, but I think a lot of that stuff gets floated or to see how the market's going to react. But
sure,
there's been a lot of content. We'll just start with this topic first, and then we'll hit the other one secondly. A lot of content that's kind of favorable to such an acquisition scenario. Other commentary, what the heck is going on here? It's not the most complimentary acquisition. I actually do see some synergies in it, but Rob, let me start with you. I mean, A, are you surprised? And B, do you think it makes sense?
I'm surprised, but I'm also not sure that this isn't like a lot of the time these so-and-so is going to merge with so-and-so. It turns out to be some analyst who's basically trying to ship the two companies. And where you push the two together and say, now kiss. It would sort of make sense for Netflix, but on the other hand, like for Roku, it's a net negative because historically they've been able to say we're the Switzerland of media players. Now they would be Germany of media players. I don't know what you would call it. So I'm not sure the upside for Roku there. And for Netflix, are they hurting for hardware distribution? Do they feel that they don't have enough control over the actual user experience? I don't know. They it seems remarkably consistent to me. Whatever, here I'm looking at my iPad, my Windows laptop, Chromecast downstairs. I don't feel like my Netflix experience is getting diminished because it's on all these different companies' hardware.
Well, what I would inject in here, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, is that Roku is really an ad-supported hardware company. I mean, if you look at their financials, they generate a tremendous amount of revenue on advertising. And Netflix is kind of has been, at least up until today, has really been purely a service plan offering. There's been rumors about them going down a path with start to provide ads. So for me, the Netflix acquisition angle makes sense because, hey, we've got a proven hardware company that knows how to do online digital ads,
That's true.
Anyway, but Stu, are you going to say something?
Yeah.
Well, no, I agree with you. I mean, it makes sense from a Netflix point of view because they really do have to build out an advertising tier level of business, and they don't have any experience in that. And Roku has all the experience in the world. Now, this all started because apparently Roku employees were told they couldn't sell any of their vested stock. That's where this rumor started. And Roku did start as sort of a skunk works inside of Netflix whenever they got started. And the founder, Anthony Woods, I think, either worked for Netflix or had some association with Netflix.
Their first streaming media player was Netflix only, right?
I believe so, yeah. So, but it doesn't make any sense for either one of them from a practical business point of view, only because, as Rob said, that they've been considered to Switzerland. And what streaming company would want to do business with Roku if they were owned by Netflix? And what hardware company would be interested in supporting Netflix when Netflix owns its competitors, the Apple TVs and the Google Chromecats of the world. So, and the TV makers, obviously, who have Roku as their primary operating systems. So there are some positive aspects of this, but I think the expertise that Netflix is looking for could probably be acquired in a way that doesn't impact the other one, their primary business, which is trying to be on as many platforms as possible.
Mm-hmm. John, your take?
You guys are right. I mean, historically, these companies made each other, right? Netflix made Roku, and Roku made Netflix. That's how this whole business started, even when Netflix didn't stream very well, if you guys remember that. And Anthony is the inventor of the DVR, PVR. That's who that guy is. But he decided never to put one. I remember, we'd meet every time he was in New York, and he was never going to put that in a Roku box. I was like, come on, put the DVR in. We just want that other aspect. No, he wouldn't do it. So I think this rumor makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think the Switzerland issue is an issue because, look, Apple has their own services on their thing. Other people have their own services and streaming. The TV companies all have their own streaming support now as well. And Roku is kind of maxing out a little bit. I mean, because they're in a lot of the televisions they're going to be in. And so that business is already off to, fulfill that. They've got the lock on the external boxes hardware. I mean, is there somebody else? Really there's not. And they're, so they're looking for other opportunities too. And Netflix is having a subscriber problem. This could be, perfect marriage. But I agree with you guys too. Floating this idea is part of it. You want to see what those other companies are going to say. Is there a hue and cry from NBC? Does somebody else not like this idea? And they'll see what, but I kind of like the idea, but I don't own stock in these companies, obviously, or any of that.
Yeah. So I suspect that if this deal does get consummated, and it's actually a real deal, we will revisit this in a future podcast in the not too distant future. But let's go back to the other topic that's pretty important, is that Europe, essentially the EU wants to pretty much tell, device makers like the Apples of the world, like the Googles of the world, hey, guess what? You got to use USB-C, so you can use a common charger. Now, let me just, before John, I knew you were going to jump in. But let me be the voice of the hardware device maker, since I'm one of the four of us that has actually have worked for hardware companies. I'm not really thrilled, despite the fact that they have very noble aspirations of, they want to do this from an environmental standpoint. Customer don't have to have 10 different types of chargers and cables in the drawer. I get that completely. I get a little nervous, more than a little nervous, when a government agency wants to tell a privately held company, or companies, plural, you have to embrace this type of hardware feature. I mean, that kind of scares me, and hopefully there's some common sense compromises as we kind of transition. There's no question that USB-C has advantages over Lightning, because the Lightning standard has been around forever, and Apple obviously, and they've had one foot in the door with USB-C, as you know, because some of their all of their client piece Macs, Mac portables are all USB-C. There's different variants of USB-C. Apple likes to call it.
Don't say variant. That's not good.
Yeah, I don't want to scare you, but John, before you jump out of your skin, I'll see this. What's your take on this? You're completely in favor of a company being told what to do, I assume.
I am, and there's some cases in which that across the board. Look, there are plugs in the country. You have universal plugs in each country. They're being told what to do. That's the plug you make to plug into the wall if you want to use electricity. SAE, all these standards, ISO standards, IP protocols, the companies are being told what to do. Not a big deal. Everybody does it. You need a standard. And this is a contrived standard. It's not the case that technically that old Lightning one is so much better connector and much better capacity and faster speed. That's not true. None of that's true. So yeah, there should be a standard. This just makes a lot of sense. It's just ridiculous not to. And like you said, Apple is already doing it. It's just like, oh, just do it already and we'll move on. So I think that having technical standards is a long history of that. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think consumers are going to be like, hooray, thank you so much.
So, Stewart, do you agree with Comrade John?
John, you ignorant slut. No, I'm always worried. I'm always worried when governments impose technological standards. I mean, they do so in the wireless spectrum, and usually there are government bodies who are experts in this sort of thing. But as we have discussed oftentimes in the past, governments don't know what the hell they're doing most of the time when it comes to technology. This still has to pass through several other technical and European parliamentary levels. It's not due to take effect until 2024. I think Apple was already leaning in this direction, but I think the one hole in all of this is that the EU is saying that they're doing this for environmental reasons to reduce waste. And it's, as far as I can see, this is going to have the opposite effect. You're going to have all of these people switching to USB-C. All of these Apple households in Europe have all of these Lightning connectors and cables in their homes. I haven't seen anything in the legislation that deals with that. I haven't seen any mention of a buyback program, of a disposal. Somebody's going to have to arrange and pay for the collection of all of these soon-to-be outmoded Lightning jacks and cables in order to properly dispose of them. And I haven't heard anything about this from the EU or from anybody on the tech side. So if they're looking for an environmental impact, they're going to be hit with this completely predictable consequence of all of this waste of the Lightning cables being put into the garbage. And so I don't see how this solves the problem without them addressing what they're going to do with all of this legacy stuff that are currently Europeans own.
Right. No, that there's going to be a consequence. I think that's essentially what you're saying, Lord.
Yeah, it's not unintended. It's completely predictable.
But it's free, remember, to drop off your cables and all that stuff at Staples, Best Buy, and all those places in the United States.
Yeah, and people will actually do that.
Well,
what you want to do is collect all the old Lightning cables and chargers, find some way to recycle that, put it into ammunition for Ukraine's army, and then boom. It's a real win-win except for Russia. I'm between you guys on this point. I think my line is this a problem outside of people's houses? So, I hate the Lightning cable connector with the Fire of 1,000 Suns. It's useless. It adds nothing. My next iPad mini will not have that. Unfortunately, won't have a headphone jack either. But this doesn't really affect other people's ability to use the gadgets of their choice. I'm glad, John, you mentioned SAE. Like the EU does have a standard, unlike the US, for electric car chargers, which is why if you buy a Tesla over there, apparently we'll have the CCS charger that every other electric car does there as well. We don't have that in the US, which is crazy. You can't have a system where I can't go to that gas station. I got the wrong connector on the side of my car. We haven't put up with that with gasoline powered cars. Maybe we did at some point, well before my parents' birth. And so that's an area where, yes, you should have the heavy hand of the regulatory state say, nope, stop innovating. We have to pick on something. This is good enough. Direct your energies elsewhere. And same thing with wireless standards. Cell phones use public airwaves. So yeah, they have to comply with certain standards so everybody can play nicely together. I think it's problematic that Apple is being so stubborn and not just ripping off the Band-Aid already. I don't know that falls into the category of problems that government has to solve.
Boy, Rob, that's remarkably open-minded of you.
Falsely conservative. I'm capable of doing that,
I think COVID has broadened your, I mean, Adam Smith would be very proud of that kind of a comment. Anyway, the only thing I'll just say now, before we hit the next topic, because we got to get into WWDC, the only thing I would say is that I'm probably more aligned with Stewart on when government tries to do things to help people, when they help, there's unintended consequences. I mean, I live out here in California, where for several years, actually for about a decade now, you have to pay for trash bags or your bags when you go to the supermarket. I cannot tell you the problems that has caused from a consequence standpoint, from not only a cost standpoint, but apparently there's a lot of recycling challenges that hasn't panned out the way I think they intended to when they rolled this program out. But I don't know. I think this becomes kind of a non-issue. If the iPhone 14 uses USB-C, if all future mobile devices that Apple starts to launch from this point on, it becomes almost a non-issue type of thing. So anyway, let's go into the WWDC issue. I wrote a column about this on my newsletter with I think the caption was that, Apple serves up mild salsa. How do this week?
Salsa.
Yeah, and what I meant by that is that, and I know all you guys watched it, or at least watched the recap. It really there wasn't really anything presented that I could say to a stranger who's a Windows or a hardcore Android user and says, you know what, Apple has figured this out. You have to, throw out your Windows and Android devices and go get an iPhone and go get a MacBook. There was a lot of stuff, that if you're in the Apple ecosystem, it was terrific, but it's kind of like this, when the most exciting part of the announcement is that, oh boy, the way you can edit text messages within a 15-minute window. I'm like, okay, is that going to change the world? I mean, certainly convenient. I'm glad they added that, But anyway, let me before we hit the various topics here, we may not cover all of them here. Rob, did you get the sense of hey, this is not exactly the most critical WWDC you've seen in the last few years?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, so looking at this iPad, the thing that jumped out at me was they will add a weather app to this thing. A dozen years after Apple introduced a tablet, they've decided maybe they could just take the weather app they've had in the iPhone all along and put it on the iPad. Still no calculator, though. That's obviously too difficult.
Right.
Yeah, it's little stuff, and incremental change is good. Like I'm happy that the next version of iOS, iPadOS, will not mask the Wi-Fi password as you're typing it, as if that is some critical national security threat. Yeah, the advances in continuity, the ability to use your iPhone as the webcam for your Apple computer, which, given that, how long ago did they ship that $1,600 monitor with its own built-in camera that I guess now is not good enough to use? Yeah, it didn't. There was nothing there that made me think, this changes my device buying calculus.
Well, and by the way, on the continuity issue, you've been able to do that with third-party software, for some time. Now, it's going to be built into the operating system, which is always great because it's natively supported, and there'll probably be some performance enhancements because Apple's got it built into the operating system. But to your point, Rob, that's the kind of feature that doesn't light the world on fire.
Yeah.
But you were going to say something. Go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, I'm just looking over my notes. See what else did jump out at me. Yeah,
In fact, you have to refer to your notes.
Nice. Great, but it's not a huge advance over what's there before. It is nice that they're paying attention to the Mail app because that's been historically neglected for the longest time. And right. Mail is the thing, as you all can attest from how long I take to answer your messages. It's a pain to stay on top of, but it's also, better than all the other horrible alternatives to Mail.
Now, John, because I can't wait to chat with you about this, is that because you're a car guy, I love CarPlay. I'm the kind of person that would never. They flashed up a number. Was it 80% or 90% of people planning to buy a car would never buy a car unless it had CarPlay support? It was some very high percentage. I'm probably one of those type of guys. But they announced a plan to pretty much take over. The thing I said in my column was, well, if they can't announce their own car, we might as well take over all the screens in everybody else's car. And it's and as you know, most modern cars built over the last couple of years, and this is going to be it's going to be like an LCD fest. in the cockpit of a car going forward. I mean, even my new Audi that I got a few months ago, the entire instrumentation panel is completely a big LCD that can change. And, my thoughts is that, now this is the feedback I want to get from you, John, is that how do you think the car makers are going to respond? Now, they did say, oh, yeah, we got a lot of car guys that, want to embrace the next iteration of CarPlay, but aren't they going to be concerned about being boxed out, given that there's advertising opportunities that go along with that? And if you allow Apple to essentially take over the entire car, where's the differentiation from a brand standpoint? So, John, what's your perspective on that?
Well, the first thing is safety. Remember, Apple doesn't know anything about cars. They don't know anything about safety in cars. They have no experience dealing with any of this. And so having a giant smartphone as a screen while you're driving along is probably not the smartest idea. In New York City, I had to jump out of the way of a car this morning because the guy was looking at his smartphone as he drove through the intersection in Manhattan in traffic. So yeah, probably not a good idea. I mean, the biggest push actually for Apple has been to get them to share the screen. Most automakers wanted to share the screen in the deal with CarPlay. And one of the problems with it was once it took over the map, you couldn't have the map and your radio on the same screen or your HVAC or other things. Volvo finally broke that mold, and then Volvo got them to share the screen and said, no, you got it. We're not going to do it from a safety point of view. I think it's a nice idea. It's probably not. They're not taking control of really anything except that screen. So it's not like they're not like getting into the inside of your car, any of the controls or anything like that. So it is.
Well, John, let me just stop you. I mean, if you listen to the presentation, the first time, if the presentation is to be believed, instead of using the audio interface to change climate control, you'll be able to use CarPlay. If you want to use change any of the settings or what would be controlled by the car's brand interface, you'll be able to do that with CarPlay. That's what my understanding is. Now, will they have you go to the next step, whatever type of safety features that Audi or whoever is building into the car? Will they let you control that? I'm not sure. And to your point, I'm not sure that Apple. I'm not sure Apple wants responsibility for that, honestly. But
well, remember, these are just like they're not really in the system. These are just like allowing Apple to write to an API. So it's really not controlling it. And Android already does those things, so you can do that in Android. But yeah, they're not going to allow access to some of these other systems. You can imagine if they started messing with adaptive cruise control, right? And what the distances are and how fast you were going, the sensor arrays. That's just not a thing yet for Apple. I mean, it really is just extending the screen to give a better experience. And I think it is also anticipating that time when we do have autonomous vehicles, and then you can take your eyes off the road and really look at that screen. Right. And see all of that stuff happening. So
that's my fact. When you get to that vision, which is going to happen at some point or the other, then all of a sudden, since you don't have to worry about looking on the road and looking at the instrument panel, you're going to see chunks of that screen used for advertising. And the car makers know that. They want you to be they know that, hey, if you're captive in your car for a couple of hours, if you don't have to worry about where you're driving, why not watch a bunch of ads? So.
It's irritating. Waze already does that too. So I'm driving along and Waze is like, hey, there's a Starbucks. Do you want to stop? And I was looking going, no, I thought it was a speed trap you were telling me about. I don't want to know about the Starbucks. So it could be kind of irritating.
Stewart, did you see anything that jumped out at WWDC? Anything that you?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about, just discussing this whole general topic, is a case of heightened expectations. I mean, this is an annual event. This is their developers conference. So what they're really presenting isn't really designed for mainstream consumption or to present anything new and wonderful. It's to keep their developers up to date on what the company is doing and upgrades in whatever operating language and Swift and things that they're doing that they can write applications and software for. So I think we have to be careful about looking for something earth-shattering when all they're really doing is letting developers know what's going on. The second thing is that I was very surprised that they introduced the M2 MacBook Air. number one, it's not a MacBook Air. It's like a MacBook Pro Mini. And MacBook Air is a wedge. This MacBook Air, the new one, the M2, is not an Air. It's a MacBook Pro Mini. That's what I'm referring to. But it also could end up being a breakthrough product for them because it hits a lot of different things. It's as powerful as the MacBook Pro that I have at the moment, but at the price of a MacBook Air. So I think this is going to hit a sweet spot for a lot of people. I was just surprised that they introduced it at this show. I like the text editing thing that you so blithely, just wait over. I mean, how many of us have had autocorrect make an embarrassing or silly correction what we typed, and we always have to put an asterisk and then type in what we really meant. So I think that's actually a pretty big deal. The other thing I really liked was Stage Manager. I work on a 27-inch Mac, which I'm staring at even as we speak, and I often confuse myself with the number of windows I have open and going back and forth between programs. So I happen to like the whole Stage Manager idea without me having to go down to the bottom and spring up the trigger-oriented applications at the bottom and just having them all, the ones that I have open right there on the side, and I know exactly where they are. So I sort of like that. Again, not earth-shattering, but that will certainly, I think that is going to help my productivity. So I agree with Rob on the email improvements.
And Stewart, it's certainly a step forward. Stage Manager is certainly a step forward to making the iPad, particular, much more apt for productivity applications, because the iPad OS has had multitasking for some time. God knows I haven't been able to figure it out. It was very, very gestural.
Yeah, it's so bad.
And I said so. The discovery capability, I think, is going to be much more compelling, frankly, and reposition the iPad as much more. Hey, I could actually create not just view content, but actually create content and use it as an alternative to a MacBook. And the other thing I would say about the M2 piece, what's interesting about that, Stewart? If you look at the benchmarks they showed during the meeting, during the presentation, essentially, you have to ask yourself, why should I buy a MacBook Pro 13-inch with an M2?
Right, that's exactly what I was thinking.
The reason for it is that the MacBook Air, the new one, like the prior one, uses a fanless design. And because it's fanless, they can only run it at a certain power rating. So it's going to be very high performing, but not as high performing as a MacBook Pro with an M2, because it has a fan and they can run it at a higher optimum speed.
That's fine, but I think that for a mainstream audience,
you're right. I know what you're going to say. You're right.
The mainstream audience is not going to be as concerned with that as much as they're going to be with the fact that it's slightly lighter, but the fact that it's got all of this processing power for a lot of people who work on the go. And I think the old MacBook Airs, even the M1 MacBook Air, it's not as good as the Pro, but this is now reaching Pro levels, and I think this will satisfy a lot of those people who need more than the MacBook Air and don't need or want a MacBook Pro. And I think that's a very large population.
Now, Rob, before we get off this topic, I've got to ask you, were you surprised that there was absolutely zero mention, nada, zippo, mention of anything around Apple glasses?
I was indeed surprised, since certain people in the tech universe have not been able to shut up about that. When will Apple have AR glasses or even VR headset of some sort? But yeah, no mention of it at all.
And you would think WWDC would have been the perfect platform, maybe not to announce the hardware yet, but to announce an AR VR OS. So the
developers working on it, tell them what the confines of the platform are going to be. Yeah, there was none of that, which was weird. And I would have thought that would be more relevant to that audience than, say, talking about some version of CarPlay that they will have no role in developing apps for, and that is much further out.
Right. Yeah, no, and I'll tell you what was interesting too is that there's been a lot of rumors bouncing around that Apple glasses, or whatever you want to call them, has been delayed to second half next year because they're having battery power issues. And my take on that is, I've always been a bit dubious about how this is going to play with mainstream audience. I really think that AR VR glasses are really they do have some interesting consumer entertainment applications, but where they really shine is in very narrow applications for business operations, warehouses, things that are not broadly mainstream. And the reality is, though, if you want to make a mainstream device, you can't have something that looks like the AirPod Maxes. I mean, when I walk around my complex, I love the sound of the AirPod Maxes, but they're humongous in compared to other devices. And if battery power is going to be a big issue, because they're going to have to run a fairly fast variant of their Apple Silicon on it. So if this thing comes out and you look like you're from Venus when you put it on your helmet, on your head, that's going to be a big issue. So kind of interesting that there was really no mention of it at all, zero. So maybe I should be
rumor mongers completely whiffed on that.
John, any last comments before we flip to the next?
No,
topic?
I agree. We were expecting some things like that, and it's just like I said before. I think we were talking last week about it. The technology isn't quite there for a product like that to really make it work. And Apple is, if they're famous for anything, it's for that. Waiting until the technology is actually available to make that product that consumers actually want. They have that knack for that product, and they'll wait for somebody, other people to do it first, but until they get it exactly right. So not totally surprised.
Well, one other thought on this, and maybe Apple has discovered something that I think I discovered a long time ago. Consumers don't like technologies that cover their eyes. Whether it's 3D glasses, whether it's these private theater things, whether it's the Google Glass, no technology that covers the eyes has ever been successful in the mainstream. None. And the fact that, as John said, the technology simply isn't there yet, I think Apple is being very wise in waiting until not only the technology is ready, but whether or not consumers are willing to put technology on their eyes. It simply has not happened in the century that we've had consumer technology products. Of all the body parts that have been impacted by technology, the eyes have been the one place where consumers have indicated over and over again they don't like to put things.
Well, and you know what? And I'll just go one step further on this, and then we're going to go to the next topic, is that there has to be a killer app to make this mainstream oriented.
Like any other new technology.
Yeah, there needs to be a Lotus 1, 2, 3 or a VisiCalc that's really going to make this app, make it shine. I personally think that kind of application is going to be something like a FaceTime VR app where, you put the thing on and not only do you see the person, you see the person as if they're next to you in a room. And can that be done without it being, too cute? Who knows? Maybe Apple will figure that out. But let's hit the next.
You're talking about live presence, which is exactly right.
Exactly. So let me hit the next topic here. Stewart, this was your baby, and I think it's a good one. Is that because we're about to see these hearings? I'm using the word charitably tonight during prime time, which is an interesting dynamic. But for those of us who were in our teenage years during the Watergate hearings in '73 and early '74, that was a 3-network affair. Interesting enough, the thing I will say is that I remember, even though it was broadcast mostly during the day and sometimes would go into the evening, it still gathered a very impressive audience. And even though there were only 3 networks, of course, around back then, now you've got you've got cable news, you've got online viewing. The Democrats are thinking that they'll get better viewership if they do it during the evenings. But Stewart, let me get your perspective on this, because I know that you're chomping at the bit to give us your point of view on this now.
Yes, I've worn down my teeth chomping at the bit. But during the Watergate era, I was actually in college when that was going on, and it was a situation of, because it dominated, because there were so few channels, there was this pre-cable, pre-streaming, you almost had to watch it. There really wasn't much on. It was either that or Bozo the Clown during the day on Channel 11 if you're from New York. So there weren't a whole lot of other choices. Yeah. You almost had to watch it. And I think the spirit in the country at the time was far less cynical than it is today. Politically speaking, there were far less of the radical divisions that you had today. You had the Vietnam War, which was a real dividing line in the country. And I think a lot of the anger against Nixon was not only the Watergate, but the fact that he was not ending the war as he had promised. And that was really dividing the country. So I think a lot of it stemmed from, there was a lot more political, I don't want to say acumen necessarily, but a lot more people were paying a lot more attention to it at the time. And there was a lot more, even Barry Goldwater thought that Nixon had to go. Whereas today, when Trump came up for the impeachment, Republicans stood behind him. So there was a lot less of that divisiveness in the country. But now in an age of cable and streaming, it's not a case of having to watch, it's a case of wanting to watch. And given today's distracted population, they actually hired a TV producer so they would bore the viewers. And if you have to do that to get people interested in saving democracy, of making sure that our electoral process remains, somewhat secure, that's a really scary thought. So, and the fact that one of the three major 24-hour cable news outlets isn't even going to carry it live. I mean,
I know who you're talking about.
They're desperate to me.
They're putting it on Fox Business. It's going to be on the business channel.
Fox Business is not one of the three major cable news outlets. It's you might as well say it's on C-SPAN. It's just not one of the three, and Fox is the single most watched cable news network. So it's not going to be on the most watched cable news network. Say what you will about whatever the politics of that are, but that's just a weird fact. And the fact that these politicians think that they're going to gain some sort of attention from this, I think they're ignoring that nobody considers the TV the hearth of the home anymore, at least not for the kind of viewing for the last episode of MASH or Super Bowl kind of things. There are just so many other alternatives. I'm hoping that people will tune in because it's democracy, and this democracy, it requires an informed populace in order to function correctly. I'm just very cynical that people are going to tune in and get anything out of this, except that, oh, look how well produced it is. That will be the major comment as opposed to the actual content of it.
So, John, I want to get your comments on this because you know what I remember, because I was a kid. I wasn't in college like Stewart was. I think I was in, I was 73. I was actually
74.
The hearings began in 73
right.
and 74. But I think I was 8 or 9, 10 years old. I was
2 years old.
Anyway, the only comment I remember, now, Stewart will laugh at this. What I remember was that during that October period, there was a lot going on. There was the Yom Kippur War was going on during the hearings. But what I remember famously is that the Mets were playing the Reds in the playoffs, and you had it, and remember, you only had 3 channels. Well, you had 3 networks. They were kind of cutting back and forth between coverage of the hearings and coverage of the what I thought was much more important, the Mets in the playoffs back in 73. But anyway, John, let me get your perspective on this whole kerfuffle around how this is being handled.
Well, it is weird. I mean, I think there's frustration with this, hearings going, look, they actually tried to overthrow the government and trying to make that point. And people are like, yeah, they're not really reacting to that. So I feel like they feel like, no, they really tried to overthrow the government. And so they're trying to really make that point, and they feel compelled that the only way, as you've pointed out extensively, is to do it in the evening, etc. With Watergate, I watched Watergate too. I'm not going to tell you how old I was when I watched Watergate, but I watched Watergate too. I was actually staying with relatives in a hotel in Lake Placid. And being more of a bookwormy kid, I would go into a special room they had there, a TV viewing room, and they were in the dark, and there were like 4 old guys and myself watching those hearings. And I mean, as a young person, it was just stunning to hear Dean talk about, then Al Capone, Richard Nixon, and it was like, what? You were hearing these things that just stunned the country. As you were right, we weren't as cynical then, and we were all kind of shocked. And now you're right. People are much more cynical.
But John, just to be fair, a lot of the material that came out, even if you were a hardcore Republican back in 1973 and thought the world of Richard Nixon, it was hard to defend anything that his behavior with the break-in and the way it was handled. And my point being is that there was a lot of compelling content, whether it was John Dean, who was the
Butterfield. Alexander Butterfield revealed the existence of the tape.
The tape system, and that was like that was like history in real time. The shock. There's a recording mechanism in the Oval Office. Oh my God, right. And then you got the Don Dean. There's a cancer on the presidency type of thing. There was a lot of compelling material. And we all know how many movies came out of that. The reason why, and this is my own theory about what's going to happen tonight, is that the cast of characters, many of them may have had in their hearts, we're going to overthrow the government. But John Brown, these guys were not. They were a collection of clowns. Now, the fact that it was so amateurish, and you had Chewbacca Man and all these other guys that they decide, hey, let's go down to Washington and walk around the Capitol and do all kinds of nasty things. I just don't think it was raised to the level of a 7 Days in May, what the reference I'm making to, type of conspiracy. And I think a lot of Americans, they say, you know what? Yeah, it was amateur hour. Yeah, maybe they did try to overthrow the government, but it wasn't very well done.
Well, I think that these hearings
are going to kill people. There were people running for their lives, right?
Yeah.
So there are people running for their lives, and people were killed.
People should take it with the utmost seriousness. It really was an attempt to destroy American democracy.
Right. And unlike Richard Nixon never stormed the Capitol. He just
he did leave quietly.
Well, I think what the hearings are supposed to indicate, and this is getting off the topic of the technology, is that there was a concerted effort over and above the shaman and the Proud Boys, that there was a concerted effort from the Oval Office to make sure that this was going to happen. So I think that's what the hearings tonight are supposed to really reveal, that it wasn't just a bunch of these misled people, that there was a concerted effort from the highest levels of our government to put this into effect. So, I think that gets us off the topic of whether or not televised hearings is the technology that they ought to be employing, either solely or in concert with others, to get that message out. And I think that's the point that I wanted to raise with this.
Clearly not solely. You've got to start somewhere. All this viral video that goes viral on Twitter, most of it starts off as a TV clip somewhere. I can't compare this to Watergate, by the way. I can compare it to watching the Iran-Contra hearings at some beach house down the shore in 88, whatever it was. And then, it was starting to be a more fragmented media landscape. And that didn't ultimately make a huge amount of difference. But you know what, no matter what, look, we all write stories not thinking this story is a failure if every person who should read it doesn't read it. You have to get the story out there.
Yeah. I agree
with that.
Yeah.
So, Rob, I just want, because we got to get into the last topic here. The last question I have for you: are you concerned that there's going to be footage of you under Nancy Pelosi's desk? Is that what you're afraid of?
I literally can't remember the last time I was actually inside the Capitol proper. I've been to a few lunchtime panels at the Capitol Visitor Center and the House and Senate office buildings, but actually inside the building with the dome, I'm like everyone else from around here who doesn't actually work on the Hill. I can't remember when I last set foot in that building.
Well, all I will say here is, and just final comment on this, is so you guys know exactly what my point of view on this is. Anybody who did that, who disrupted, tried to kill someone, had weapons with them, they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I do agree that even when something is amateur-hourish, as some of it was, that still doesn't make it any less serious. So I agree with that. But Stewart, to your point is the ratings are going to be the tail of the tape, and if all of a sudden this turns out to be kind of if people are turning into, Gilligan's Island rerun episodes, then we know we got a problem, and that might be just a function of the fact there's a lot of distractions. And I think that's the point, Stuart, you're making. You didn't have social media back in 1973. You didn't have the kind of content for even movie volume, conventional movie volume. A lot more content available today through other means that was available back in 1973. So there's a lot of things competing for people's attention, by the way, and smart devices, So we're going to see what happens here. Let's hit our last topic.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, because John's got a book. Rob, this is Rob's topic. I can't even say the word NESN because I know what that stands for.
This is where I've got to make Mark very upset because we have to say nice things about the Boston Red Sox. So what we have here is a first. NESN, the New England Sports Network, the regional sports network that carries Red Sox and Boston Bruins games, is offering a direct-to-customer subscription, which means you don't need to buy the traditional bundle of 80 other channels you don't actually care about to watch the teams and the games you do care about. They'll charge $30 a month, which is not great. But on the other hand, you could just watch for the duration of the baseball season, then cancel it during the hot stove season. And it's something that MLB has been encouraging RSNs to do for a while, saying like, look, you've got to go DTC, direct to consumer. Find some way so you're not economically handcuffed to the declining universe of linear bundle TV. Now, the question is, who's going to follow next? There's a handful of RSNs that Sinclair operates under the Bally Sports name. Supposedly, they're going to do that at some point this summer. I don't know who's going to follow. I know it's going to be last. The Mid-Atlantic Sports Network, which carries the games of my currently cellar-dwelling Washington Nationals, as well as the also cellar-dwelling Baltimore Orioles, which is horribly absentee mismanaged. So they will probably go DTC sometime in like 2032. So it's got to happen. You know, the price can vary, but yeah, if somebody wants to just give you their money and not go through a middleman, you should probably find a way to take their money.
And you were able to say that, make that whole presentation without saying the word Red Sox only once. I'm very proud of you.
That speaks for itself.
You know, I will say it really goes to this issue. I mean, once there's this balkanization that's been going on with baseball, in that you know, like for the example, the other day I wanted to watch the Yankee game. It wasn't on yet. It wasn't on the MLB streaming. It wasn't on. I guess it was on the local. WPIX or whoever carries it in New York. It was on that Apple package thing.
Oh, right.
So I had to go to 3 places to find the Yankee Tigers game, you know, and that to me is a thing that's very frustrating, that you cannot go, you know, consistently to the same source and get your sports content, you know. But this is an interesting development. You know, John, I know you're not a huge sports fan, but any thoughts on this? Do you think, are you just kind of so what?
Yeah, this is not a thing. Like I'm much more of the I'm a sports fan until it starts costing me a lot of money, and then I'm like,
that happens pretty quickly.
Do I really need to watch that football game? Probably not. You know, because I think, well, it's an entertainment, but maybe I'm kind of wasting my time, and now you want me to spend more money on it too. It's like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do that. Right. So that's unfortunately. Or I figure out a workaround, like how can I watch the F1 without actually paying for ESPN? You know, that's the other thing I do. So
well, Stewart, before we sign off, because you're a resident baseball guy, what are your closing thoughts on this development?
Well, the first thing that I saw when Rob raised the topic was the price. I cannot believe they're charging $30 a month. When Netflix, people are complaining that Netflix, which has a bottomless well of content, is charging $21, I think it is now, a month without commercials. I cannot believe that they thought they were going to get away with charging people $30 a month for this, when there's one game a day at most, and that's only during baseball season. The Bruins, the hockey season, is one game every 2 or 3 days, and the rest of the content is filler. For $30 a month, for 5, 10, maybe even 20. I'm stunned that somebody in the people in the boardrooms there thought that $30 was a reasonable price, given forget the marketplace where Netflix is the most expensive. You can get Apple TV for $5 a month or $6 a month, whatever it is, or Hulu, the Disney, ESPN, Hulu package for $19 a month. And plus, given inflation and gas prices, I'm just knocked out by. They thought that $30 was a reasonable price for this.
Stuart, the only thing I'll say about that is Red Sox fans are suckers. That's all I'll say.
I guess. I mean, I'm a Met fan, but if SNY said to me, "We'll charge you $30 a month," for this, I would go, forget it. I'll listen to the game on the radio. I'll set up a VPN and try to catch even Major League Baseball. MLB.TV is half that price. And that's every game in the planet.
I was about to make that comment. But anyway, We've gone almost 50 minutes, which is, I think, sets the record for our longest podcast. But guys, listen, thank you for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the SmartTechCheck podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week. And guys, have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks.